story of the creation of the golden calf, and then subsequently the repentance and God giving the people the second set of tablets. So there's a lot of drama, of course. Just to place the parsha. So the parsha is placed in the Torah in between the four portions that discuss the Mishkan, the tabernacle. So if you think about it for a moment, so you have the past 2 weeks we read Truma and Tetzaveh. Truma is primarily the commandment, God commanding Moses to build the tabernacle and the furniture for the tabernacle. That was 2 weeks ago. Last week was Tetzaveh, which is primarily the commandment to construct garments for the priests, for Aaron and his 4 sons. That was the commandment from God to Moses. Next week, we're going to read a combined 2 portions, Vayakhel and Pekudei, the last 2 portions of the book of Exodus. Repeat all of this. It repeats how Moshe told the people, and then how people actually did what God commanded them, which was to, first of all, to build the tabernacle and its furniture and the garments of the high priest. So we have 4 portions about the tabernacle, 2 of God telling Moses, and then another 2 of Moses telling the people, and the people are actually doing it. In between is this portion, the portion of the golden calf and the great sin. Now, there's debate when exactly the golden calf occurred. There are different biblical commentators who debate about the actual order. But if you read it simply in the chronological order, you read that God commanded Moses, and that's one opinion. God commanded Moses while Moses was on the mountain. Because remember, the week before that, 2 weeks before that, we read about Moshe, the Jewish people get the Torah at Sinai, and Moses climbs the mountain for 40 days. During that period of the 40 days, God is teaching him the Torah. Amongst the laws that God is teaching him is about the commandment, is about the tabernacle. Then Moses turns to come down 40 days later. And that's when the debacle happens with the creation of the golden calf, which we will discuss. So that's just an introduction to the nutshell, just to place us in the book, in the middle of the second half of the book of Exodus. And with that, we begin the parsha in a nutshell. Kitisa literally means, if you will, lift up, and refers to the commandment of counting the Jewish people, the census. So the way they counted people is, we don't count people. Each person gave a half a coin, and they counted the coins, and those coins served the function in the temple, which was to bring, they would take all that money, and that money was the fund from which they took money for the communal offerings throughout the year. So the people are told to each contribute exactly half a shekel of silver to the sanctuary. Instructions are also given regarding the making of the sanctuary's water basin, anointing oil, and incense. Wise-hearted artisans, Bitzalel and Aliav, are placed in charge of the sanctuary's construction. In other words, it's still God talking to Moses. God tells Moses that he has 2 chief architects. One is Bitzalel, one is Aliav. It's significant because Bitzalel is the leader, is from the tribe of Judah, which was considered the leader of the tribes, whereas Ahaliav was a member of the tribe of Dan, which when they traveled through the desert, Dan was the last tribe. In other words, it was the back of the camp. So you have somebody from the head of the camp and someone from the end of the camp to show that before God, everybody is equal, and all parts of the Jewish people were necessary to build this tabernacle for God. So, and the people are once again commanded to keep the Shabbat. So that's the concluding the laws and the details that discuss that pertaining to the tabernacle. And then here starts the drama. When Moses does not return when expected from Mount Sinai, the people make a golden calf and worship God and worship it. God proposes to destroy the Arab nation, but Moses intercedes on their behalf. Moses descends from the mountain carrying the tablets of the testimony engraved with the 10 commandments. Seeing the people dancing about their idol, he breaks the tablets, destroys the golden calf, and has the primary culprits put to death. He then returns to God to say, if you do not forgive them, blot me out from the book that you have written. God forgives, but says that the effect of their sin will be felt for many generations. At first, God proposes to send his angel along with them, but Moses insists that God himself accompany his people to the promised land. Moses prepares a new set of tablets and once more ascends the mountain, where God inscribes the covenant on these second tablets. On the mountain, Moses is also granted a vision of the divine 13 attributes of mercy. So radiant is Moses' face upon his return that he must cover it with the veil, which he removes only to speak with God and to teach his laws to the people. So some people, you may have heard that the Jews have horns. Where does that come from? Of course, it comes from this week's Parsha. Of course, in Hebrew, it says the Jewish Karan or Pnei Moshe, Moshe's face became radiant. The word for radiant, Karan, could mean radiant. If you read it differently, Karen is horn. So whoever read it, either on purpose or by mistake, misread it and decided that Moses had horns, and that's how it got into Michelangelo's picture. And then from then, all the Jews have horns. Of course, it means not horns, but radiance, but that's another story. Okay, so that's the story with the drama. So we have a lot to talk about, a lot to discuss. In the meantime, if anybody wants to raise a specific point that you're curious about, please do. Otherwise, we continue and we try to go somewhat in order and try to cover at least some of the themes of this drama-packed Parsha.
Rabbi,
Yes.
may I ask you a question, please? Thank you. I was reading, and I'd like to get your opinion on this regarding the golden calf. Excuse me. There was some said that the Israelites, the Hebrews, were worshiping the golden calf because in place of Moses, not against God. But I understood it that it was against God, but there was some interpretation that says they built the golden calf, or they got the golden calf because Moses wasn't coming back, so they wanted a golden calf to replace Moses.
Okay, that's a good point. We're going to examine it. God willing, we'll examine it later today. You don't need to hear it from me. We'll open up the verses, we'll read the verses, and we'll see what the verses tell us and what they allude to. So hold on to that thought. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so let's begin. Before we get to the drama, let's just begin for a moment with the name of the parsha, which is Ki Tisa, when you raise, and it's of course referring to the commandment of giving a half a coin so we can count the Jewish people. So it's a census. The reason why okay, so one thing we have to realize is that when the name of the parsha is supposed to really capture the general theme of the parsha. Now, seemingly, this doesn't happen in this parsha. The story of the counting does not capture all the drama that's going to unfold, unless you say that really the story of the counting the half coin actually does capture in some sense and sets out the stage for the theme of the parsha. So let's think about this mitzvah for a minute, the counting and the giving of the half shekel, and see how that's related to the main story, what we would consider the main story, which is the golden calf and the rehabilitation from the sin of the golden calf. But to do that, I just want to open the verses. We'll read a few verses and we'll see what we come up with. So Exodus chapter 30, verse 11, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, when you take the sum of the children of Israel according to their numbers, literally ki tisa, when you lift up the children of Israel. Lifting up in the Bible, counting is lifting up. That's another story. In any case, when you count the Jews, let each one give to the Lord an atonement for his soul when they are counted. Then there will be no plague among them when they are counted. In other words, counting is a problem. So there could be a plague when you count the Jews. And that's what happened later in the Bible in the days of King David, but that's another story. So we can't count people, we have to count the coin. Why is counting a problem? So the idea is, one interpretation comes from the Kli Yakar, which we like to read, and he's also Pam's great-great-grandfather. the Kli Yakar says as follows: when God looks at the Jewish people collectively, then everybody is pure. Everybody is holy. Why? Together we're all complete. Whatever my faults, well, you have qualities that cover for my faults. In other words, everybody has individual faults, but collectively we're holy, we're pure, we're good. The problem is that when you count people, what does counting mean? Counting means we're counting an individual. So when you start counting an individual, then you're almost like asking God to say, look at me as an individual. That already could bring that can cause a plague. In other words, that can also draw attention. If I want to be judged as an individual, that will draw attention to my weaknesses. And that's why we need atonement. Because if you're looking at me as an individual, then I need atonement. And that atonement is that half coin that I'm giving. So it's just interesting that collectively, there's no problem with the Jewish people. Individually, if you want to look at me as an individual, then I may need atonement, and that's what the function of the half coin. In any case, what is the half coin? So how much should I give? So 13 is a very technical verse, but there's a lot of mysticism and a lot of inspiration in 13, even though it seems so technical. So let's read 13. They shall give everyone who gives through the counting half a shekel according to the holy shekels. You should give a half a coin. But in those days, what is a coin? A coin, the silver was, the value of the silver wasn't because the government decided, but it was the value of the weight of the metal. That's what determined the value of the coin. So the Torah has to tell you how much weight of silver should you give. So it says 20 geras equal 1 shekel. Half of such a shekel shall be an offering to the Lord. Right? You give a half a coin. What size of coin? Shekel. Presumably people knew what a shekel was. In case you don't know, we'll tell you that shekel weighs 20 gera, and you should give not a 20 gera, but give half of 20 gera. Okay. Seemingly this is a problem. Why can't you be just more direct? Say everybody should give 10 gera of silver. No, we say, by the way, it's nice to know the gera, shekel is 20 gera, and you give half. Why do you have to say it that way? Why is the emphasis half a shekel, and we're only giving half, and 20 as a whole, but you give your 10? Okay, so all the Hasidic writings from all the different schools of Hasidism basically say the same point. And what they're saying is that the message of the half shekel is to tell every individual that I myself as an individual can never be complete. I am only half. When am I complete? Well, I have to connect to something else. What's that other thing? So the various interpretations, either to another person or to God. And that's where the Kabbalists come in, because we know that according to the Kabbalah, God has 10 divine attributes, and every soul also has 10 attributes. Basically, the makeup, this 10 sphere, the makeup of our soul is 3 intellectual attributes and 7 emotional attributes. So we have 10. But we have to understand that our 10 is only a reflection, and only half, the other half of the coin, pun intended, the other half of the coin of the divine 10 attributes. So when we come close to God, we're giving God a half a coin. We're giving 10 full gera. We're giving everything we have. All our personality we're devoting to God. But that's only half. Why? Because we're incomplete without God, because God is our other half. Okay, wonderful, inspirational story. Believe me, all the rabbis like to talk about this. Okay, but why is this placed in the beginning of this parsha? Right? Because really, this is not the place. The place of the donation to the temple was 2 weeks ago in Teruma. Why is it placed here? So now we want to think about what is essentially the theme of this parsha. So everybody likes the drama. So they say, well, it's the story of the golden calf. Well, not really. What it really is, it's a story of the rehabilitating the relationship between God and the Jewish people after the terrible betrayal of the golden calf. In other words, it's a story of forgiveness. In other words, it's a story of reestablishing the relationship and the communication with God after the great sin. In other words, it's a story about that no matter what the people do, ultimately, their bond with God will never be severed, because there's a covenant, and the covenant can never be destroyed. That's what we're going to read about. So let me just finish the point. Let me just finish. So that's what we're going to read about. So the bottom line is this. The bottom line is the best opening
It's been
scene.
dropped off down the road somewhere.
Whoops, the best opening scene for this story is the fact that we are only half and God is our other half. In other words, we're essentially connected, and nothing that we do can break the bond. Where do you see it? Well, read this parsha. Even after the terrible betrayal, the relationship with God has not been destroyed. And I know this sounds strange, but in some sense, it has deepened, as we will read. But again, all this is, if you want to put this entire story in a nutshell, you say, well, it's the story of the half shekel. We and God, we're each of us are a half of one entity. We're essentially connected. We can't be disconnected, no matter what we do. Even if we betray, even if we create a golden calf, there's always a way to reconnect, because essentially we're connected. So this is the opening. This is the opening scene to lay out. Now we can read the story, because otherwise, you have to know the end of the story. Otherwise, you're going to read the story and be so troubled and say, what's going to happen? Can't wait to the end of the story. But now I gave you the spoiler. Don't worry. We're going to reconnect. We're essentially one. So don't, now we can study the story. Go ahead, Vicky.
Well, I'm just trying to think if there is a connection between the first part of the parsha, where the currency is introduced as a symbol to connection to God, and then the people or somebody took it the wrong turn and it made a golden calf, make it a completely.
Yeah, so that's a good point. I'm going to try to address that when we get to the golden.
And my question is, who came up with the idea, and was it kind of provoked by the beginning of the?
All good questions. All good questions. We have no choice but to go straight to the story, because all the questions are coming in. So we'll go straight to the story. I'm just. Okay, the question becomes how to get into this, to go from the detail to the general, from the general to the detail. So let's first get the simple story. Let's read the simple story, and this will address what Richard mentioned, and hopefully it will tie in also to what Vicky's saying a little bit. So I'm going to the second reading, which is the beginning of the story of the golden calf. Okay, so we have a sort of a summary. The end of chapter 31 is a summary. When he had finished speaking with him on Mount Sinai, Moses is on the Mount Sinai. God finished speaking to him. He gave Moses the 2 tablets of the testimony, stone tablets written with the finger of God, meaning to say that the way the tablets, obviously the letters were engraved, they were engraved by Moses. I'm sorry, that was just to make sure everyone's listening. They were engraved by God, by the finger of God. Okay, wonderful. What a wonderful story. Right now, all this is happening. We have no sense of the trouble that's brewing, but the trouble is brewing. Why is the trouble brewing? Because Moses does not return, and the people get very nervous. Now the rabbis fill in the missing details. Why did Moses not return? Why did Moses come late? So similar to the story of the Megillah, there's always the question of the time of the counting. You need a good accountant to figure out what to do and when to do it. So Moses before he ascends Mount Sinai, he tells the people, I'm coming back in 40 days. Now the question is, when do you count day 1? So the Jewish people start counting day 1, the day Moses ascends the mountain. But of course, that's not day 1, because day 1 means a complete day. That day is not a complete day. It's only a partial day. So day 1 doesn't start till the next day. So of course, the people thought that Moses should have been back a day early, because 40 days from when he ascended, not 40 days from the next day, which was the first complete day. So if you look at verse 1, chapter 32, verse 1, when the people saw that Moses was late in coming down from the mountain, in other words, Moses climbed midday, 40 days later, midday, the people say, whoops, he's late. They were anxious for him to come. The second 12 o'clock strikes, they say he's late. By the way, the rabbis read that the word in Hebrew, which I'm pointing to, Vayara'am, the people saw that Moses was late. Bo shesh means late. They say this can be read as 2 words. Ba shesh. Shesh is 6. The 6th hour of the day passed. What's the 6th hour of the day? Is midday. So midday passes, the people say he's late. The people are gathered against Aaron, and they said to him, come on, make us gods that will go before us. because this man Moses, who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we don't know what has become of him. What does Aaron do? Imagine you're Aaron, and everybody wants a golden calf. Well, you could deny, you could say no, but then they may do it themselves. So what Aaron does, according to the sages, is what Aaron's trying to do is trying to slow the process down. So what does he do? The first thing he does, he says, okay, everybody give me your jewelry. Aaron assumes that people are not going to want to give their jewelry. That was a mistake. Aaron said to them, remove the golden earrings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them, those earrings to me. And all the people stripped themselves of the golden earrings that were on their ears and brought them to Aaron. By the way, the rabbis say that the women were not involved in making of the golden calf. And that's why Aaron says, bring me your wives' jewelry. That's not what the people did. Verse 3, it says the people stripped themselves, not the woman. Aaron specifically says, give me the woman's jewelry. They say, we're not going to the woman because then the woman may not give. And the men give their jewelry. What does Aaron do? He took them from their hands, fashioned it with an engraving tool, and made it into a molten calf, upon which they said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. Okay, this is a crisis. Now we have an idol. So what does Aaron do? Verse 5, when Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of it, and Aaron proclaimed and said, tomorrow shall be a festival to the Lord. So the first thing he does, remember, this is 12 noon. 12 noon, they make the idol. So then Aaron says, then the idol comes out. So what does Aaron do? He says, you know what, I'll build the altar. Aaron is 83 years old. 83-year-old man to build an altar took a few hours. So Aaron says, I'll build it. He doesn't want the people to build it. He wants to slow it down. So he builds it. The problem is that it's already evening time. It's afternoon. There's still time to sin. So Aaron says, you know what, tomorrow there'll be a festival to the Lord. Rashi says, he says, not to the idol, to the Lord. The Hashem never refers to idols. So Rashi says that Aaron hopes that tomorrow morning Moses will show up and then they won't serve the idol, which was an okay plan, except verse 6. On the next day, they arose early. The people were so eager to serve the calf that they woke up early. They woke up early, and that's when they serve the idol, and that's when they sin. So they offered up burnt offerings and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and to drink, and they got up to make merry. And of course, that was on the bottom of the mountain. And then on top of the mountain, God tells Moshe, and the Lord says to Moses, go descend, for your people that you have brought up in the land of Egypt have acted corruptly, etc. And then Moses prays to God to forgive, and then Moses comes down and Moses breaks the tablets, etc., etc. So the first thing we have to figure out the technicality, what exactly happened here, and that's Richard's question, and then we take Jill's question. So Richard said that he read somewhere that the people were not trying to make an idol. They were really just trying to replace Moses. In other words, they wanted a Moses, not an idol. So that is, in fact, what most of the biblical commentaries say. And the reason why they say it is because otherwise it's inconceivable that Aaron would participate in building the idol. How could Aaron build it? How could Aaron build an idol? So they say it wasn't really an idol. Where do they see this? Richard said, what? I didn't remember this in the story. But if you read it carefully again, you will see that what they're saying is not so far-fetched. If you read verse 1, the people saw that Moses was late in coming down from the mountain. The people gathered against Aaron, and they said to him, come on, make us gods. Aseh lanu Elokim. Let's leave that alone for a second. We'll get back to this word God. That will go before us. Why do they want a God? Why do they want a new God? You know why they want a new God? Not because God retired. Because this man Moses, who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we don't know what had become of him. This makes no sense. Moses is not here. That's why you want a new God? What has Moses got to do with God? So that's why the rabbis say, they're saying they want a new leader. The Hebrew word God, Elokim, God, translated gods, in biblical Hebrew means powerful. And therefore many times refers to God, but not always. Sometimes it refers to human leaders. Just 3 portions ago, it uses the word Elokim to refer to judges, because Elokim means the powerful. So what they're saying is, according to most sages, they come to God, they come to Aaron and say, Moses is gone. Moses is gone. Make us a new leader. Not a new God, a new leader. And that's why Aaron goes along with it, reluctantly, but he goes along with it. The problem is that in verse 4, there are some people once the idol is formed, there are some people who treat this as a god. And that's what it says in verse 4. Verse 4, he took them from their hands, fashioned it with an engraving tool, and made it into a molten calf, upon which they said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. At this point, there's a small group saying, not our God, your God. They are now telling others that this is your God. But that was not the intention of the people in verse 1, which is the majority of the people. So the majority of people are looking for a leader, something to go before us, something we can rally around, rally behind, I should say. And that becomes, for some people, take that and create that and treat that as an idol worship. And that's why it's a sin, but the sin was not as severe because it wasn't that everybody served idols. Most people did not treat it as an idol. Only some people did. Okay, so that is, to Richard's point, and that is the way the rabbis try to minimize the sin. By the way, if you ever need a good lawyer, you call the rabbis. They'll always be able to soften the sin, and that's exactly what they do here. It's still a terrible sin because later it becomes some of the people treat this as idol worship. So I think Jill has a question. We'll take a question and then we'll try to proceed. Okay. Vicky, if you want to say something, you want to ask a quick question and then we'll proceed.
Yeah. Quick question. When Moses went up, did he appoint Aaron as his substitute? Did he appoint anybody else?
Yeah. So if you turn back to that's a very good point. We just can't cover everything, but if you turn back to the end of Mishpatim, so it's Exodus chapter 4, Exodus chapter 24. Why don't I pull it up? Why don't I pull this up? Give me just a moment. Wrong thing. Exodus 24. So this is before Moses climbs the mountain. So let's read 24, verse 12, Exodus 24, verse 12. And the Lord said to Moses, come up to me to the mountain and remain there, and I will give you the stone tablets, the law and the commandments which I have written to instruct them. So Moses and Joshua, his servant, arose, and Moses ascended to the Mount of God, which is Sinai. And to the elders he said, wait for us here until we return to you. And here are Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a case, literally, mi bal dvarim, whoever has words, whoever has an issue, let him go to them. And Moses went up to the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. So Moses tells the people, the elders, anybody has any issues, go to Aaron and Hur. Who's Hur? Hur's his nephew, Miriam's son. Okay, this is very interesting. It's interesting for a few reasons. First of all, it's interesting because that's exactly what the people do. They don't know where Moses is. They go to Aaron. The question is, where is Hur? Not only did they not go to Hur, but Hur is off the map. We never read about him again. What happened? That leads the rabbis to say, Hur tried to stop the people from making the calf, to making the idol. And the people kill Hur. That's why we don't hear from him again. And now when they come to Aaron, it says in our parsha, Aaron saw. Where are we? Vayar Aharon, verse 5. Then Aaron saw. What did he see? So in the English, they put the bracket and they say they saw this. They saw that he made the molten calf. Rashi says no. He saw what they did to Hur. So that's again another defense for Aaron himself, because if you read the story literally, it's a very big question. How come Aaron not only wasn't punished, but he actually becomes the high priest, and he does not lose his position of the high priest, even though he was on the scene and involved in the greatest crime scene, in the greatest betrayal. So that's why this leads the sages to say we have to understand what's happening here. and we have to justify Aaron as well. And that's what they do. And the way they justify it is by saying the fact that Hur's disappearance is an indicator that he's gone, he's off the scene, which means when you read the Torah, you have to think about not only what it says, but also what it doesn't say, right? The fact that they didn't go to Hur and the fact that Hur is gone is also part of the discussion, part of the way the Torah conveys meaning. Okay. Now the question is, what's the big picture here? Okay, let's think about the big picture here. So there's a beautiful interpretation from the sages, and they say as follows. It's in Rashi, I believe. Let me see if Rashi has it. Okay, let's look at this Rashi. Beautiful. So this is 18. This is the last verse before we read the story of the golden calf, and it says as follows: when he had finished speaking with him on Mount Sinai, he gave Moses the 2 tablets of the testimony, stone tablets written with the finger of God. Wonderful. What's the word? Kichaloto, when he had finished. Literally, lechalot is to finish. You have it in other parts of the Torah as well. God finished his work on the 6th day. It says, Vayachal Elokim, same root. What do the sages say? The sages say, if you look at the Rashi quotes it from the Medrash, Rashi quotes, when he had finished. Hebrew, kikalato. This word should be spelled kikaloto with an extra vav. Here, however, it is spelled defectively without the first vav, as if to be read kikalato, meaning like his bride. Very surprising, okay? So we read the verse. When he had finished speaking to him on Mount Sinai, in other words, it's 40 days have passed, God finished speaking to Moses. The rabbis say it doesn't mean when he finished. Maybe that means that as well. But the way the Torah is written, biblical, without getting into too much detail here, in Hebrew, there are many words that could be written full or empty. Full means with a vav or without a vav, or with a yud or without a yud. And in modern Hebrew, when you'll go to buy a modern Hebrew dictionary, in the beginning of the dictionary, it's going to say we look for consistency. So all the words in this dictionary are either full, they all have a vav, or they're empty, they don't have a vav. So the modern Hebrew dictionary is consistent. The Hebrew Bible, of course, is not consistent. Sometimes it's full, sometimes it's empty, sometimes it says it with a vav, sometimes it says without a vav. So either you could say because they're not consistent. Whoever wrote the book didn't know what he was doing. Of course, that's wrong. The Torah conveys meaning by the spelling, and this is a beautiful example. You can read it, God finished telling the Moshe the Torah. Or you could say, not God finished. God gave him the Torah like a bride. Kikalato, like a bride. What does it mean it was a bride? It means it was a gift. So let's read. Rashi said, for the Torah was delivered to him, Moses, as a gift, as a bride is given to the bridegroom, because otherwise he could not have learned it all in such a short time. That's the Tanchuma. So Rashi quotes a Medrash, and Rashi says, what's happening here is the Torah is given to Moses as a bride. Okay. Why? It's a gift. Why? The fact that he can contain all this Torah in 40 days was a miracle, was a gift from God. Okay, but if you want to take the broader theme, we know that the sages say that the event at Sinai, the revelation at Sinai is like a wedding. Sinai was like the chuppah, like the wedding canopy. And therefore, when you say like a bride, who was the bride? The bride are the Jewish people. In other words, the Jewish people at this time are pure, they're like a bride, and they're loyal to God. And that's what happens when they got the Torah. But then, a little while later, just 40 days later, there's betrayal. And that's one of the big questions here. The big question here, how could there be such a terrible betrayal so short after the actual wedding, where God speaks to the people and says, there's one Lord, don't serve idols, etc. How could the people sin so dramatically, so soon after the golden calf? And the rabbis, they ask the question and say, how is it that a bride could be unloyal at the wedding? That's really essentially what happens here, because we're still at the wedding. It was 40 days later, but we're still at the wedding hall. We're still at Sinai. And that's the question. And part of the answer is, and part of the story, what the story is really telling us is that people are human and people are going to make mistakes. And that's not the question. And nothing God could do could stop us from making mistakes. To the contrary, part of the problem of the first set of tablets, which we will discuss, is that the Jewish people did not have much input. It was just given to them. And anytime you just get something from above, it's very hard to make it last. So part of the process of rehabilitation is that the people have to be involved in this relationship. And that's what the second tablets represent, as we will elaborate, hopefully with God's help. But what we're saying here is the question is only a question when you look superficially, when you expect people to be perfect, when you expect people to be complete. But it's what's so beautiful about this story is that it seems that the Torah does not expect people to be complete. The Torah says at some point there is going to be a betrayal. That's not a question. The question now becomes, what do you do? How do you try to heal it? How do you try to overcome? How do you try to do teshuvah, repent and return and rehabilitate and come out stronger? So now let's compare the first tablets and the second tablets. What do we read in the first tablets? First of all, the first tablets, we read that they were the handiwork of God, right? We read that. We read that. Let me just see if it's written even more clear. No. Okay.
Rabbi, quick question for you. Why does the Torah use the word etzba? It's a very curious word.
That's interesting. The finger of God. What does the finger of God mean? That's a good question. Well, we see it that, I don't know. The short answer is I don't know. It appears also when it came to the third plague, when when the Egyptian sorcerers say that the third plague was Etzba Elokim He, the lice was Etzba Elokim He, it's the finger of God. And Rashi, the commentaries explain, Rashi quotes the Medrash that says that they were able to replicate the first two plagues, but they can't replicate the third plague because it was too small. Lice is too small. So they couldn't replicate it. So they say this is the finger of God. So I don't know the answer. If you put me on the spot and you make me guess, I would say as follows. I would say the hand represents the power of God. The Torah says in the land of Egypt, God took us out with an outstretched arm. That's or biyad chazakah, strong hand. Hand represents the power of God. But the finger represents specific, the ability to do something specific and small, because the fingers channel the energy of the hand and allow you to channel it to something specific. And really, that's what the Torah is. Really, the plague is, in other words, God revealing his power in a specific place. That's like in Egypt, or in a specific action, which is the Torah. God says, do this action. God is investing his infinite power in a specific act. To me, that seems like the finger, which is channeling the sort of more powerful power of the hand into a specific act. So I don't know if this is right, but that's what you get on this for putting me on the spot. Okay, so what's happening here? We look at the Torah. The Torah was written by God, handed to Moses, and Rashi says, indeed, kichaloto, it was handed to Moses as a bride. As a bride means he didn't have to work for it too much. It was a gift. Now we scroll down. And right before the Torah describes how Moshe smashes the tablets, first the Torah tells you how precious the tablets were to Moses. So let's read 16. Now the tablets were God's work, and the inscription was God's inscription, engraved on the tablets. What is verse 16 telling you? Because earlier we just read that God wrote the 10 commandments on the tablets. Now we're saying the tablets itself were the handiwork of God. In other words, God made not just the software, also the hardware, right? The tablets, the stone itself were Maaseh Elokim. They were God's work. Okay, fine. Then Moses breaks the tablets, etc. And Moses goes back to God to pray to God. Long story short, after a while, Moshe talks to God. we get to the point where God tells Moshe, we're going to do like this. We're going to do a second set of tablets. Okay. Now, how do the second set of tablets differ than the first set of tablets? So verse 1, chapter 34, and the Lord says to Moses, hew for yourself 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and I will inscribe upon the tablets the words that were on the first tablets which you broke. Okay, so what's the difference? Here, Moses provides the stone. Moses takes the stone and brings them to God. God inscribes it. What does that represent? That represents that the people are actually invested in the process. It's a partnership. Part of the Torah is given from the people, part is given from Hashem. Now, this theme is actually expanded further, because the Medrash says that if they say all kinds of things, what would happen if the first tablets would never have been broken? What would happen? So the Medrash says all we would get is the 5 books of Moses and the book of Joshua. We would not have any of the oral Torah. We would not have any of the Medrash, any of the teachings, any of the various interpretations that the rabbis contribute. Now that the tablets were broken, now we get all the other parts of Torah, the Medrash, the Halacha, the disputes and the disagreements of the sages that basically keep us busy for 3,000 years. One more point that the Medrash says, all related. The Medrash says that if this Moshe would not have shattered the tablets, nobody would ever forget Torah. Whatever you learn, you remember. You wouldn't have to review, because the tablets represent the Torah, but the Torah was given by God and it's complete. If it's complete, God gives it to you, you'd never forget it. Now, says the Medrash, now that Moses shattered the tablets, that means if the tablets can be shattered, then we can forget the Torah. And in the second tablets, because they were not given from God, in other words, Moses himself offered the stone, therefore we could forget the Torah, and you have to keep reviewing and keep reviewing. And of course, the forgetfulness creates disagreement, etc., etc. So let's put everything here together. What are the sages really telling us? The sages are telling us that forgetting Torah and all the medrashim, all the commentaries which come from the human perspective, the various sages offering their own interpretation, in a sense, that's the gift of the second tablets. That's the gift that when there's human involvement, there's going to be human disagreement. Okay? And that's the beauty. That's the beauty of the second tablets. The first tablets were given to us as a gift. But if it's given to us as a gift, the gift of perfection will never last, because we're people and we're imperfect. So what does God say? Okay, the second time around, what's going to happen is the Torah, it's not perfect in the sense that we don't necessarily fully understand God's will. We don't have the clarity that we would have had if we only got the first tablets, if the tablets would never have been broken. So that's the downside. But the upside is that now every person contributes their own perspective, because there is no clarity what God's will is, no full clarity. We need the oral Torah to explain it and to apply it. So now we introduce the human perspective. And if we introduce the human perspective, now there's going to be disagreements. But the good part is, the plus is that the human being is involved. And if the human being is involved, that's why the second tablets will last and the first tablets have not lasted, because ultimately it's too powerful and too holy to be in this world. So what do we say? What essentially what we're saying here is that you have, if you want to apply it to the broader relationships, you have a relationship, and then you can be like the bride at the wedding canopy. In other words, there's no challenges. In other words, you're in the honeymoon and everything is going perfect. But what we have to understand is perfection doesn't last. And eventually there'll be betrayal. It doesn't have to be a terrible betrayal like creating the golden calf, but betrayal means there could be a scenario where we cause each other pain. My tablets have been shattered. I always thought this relationship was perfect. You never know anything about a relationship until it survives the first fight, right? So what's happening here? Before the first fight, what's happening? We say, we're perfect. We have the first tablets. Nothing can go wrong. And it's a wonderful time to be in. It's like the bride, kechaloto, like the bride at the wedding. But ultimately, that is not going to last. And this is what the Torah is signaling to us in all relationships with God and with other people, with spouses, with children. It's never going to last the perfect model. The perfect model never lasts. What's going to happen? There's going to be pain. because we're human. And because we're human, there's going to be the pain. But now the question becomes the fact that there's pain, now we have to work at healing the pain. And ultimately, the fact that we have to work at healing the pain, which is alluded to by the fact that Moses himself has to now provide the second tablets, has to provide the stones for the second tablets, which God will then write onto. That represents the fact that both sides now have to invest in this relationship. And if so, the relationship may not be as innocent as it was before the pain, but it's going to be everlasting, because the first model could never last, because perfection doesn't last in this world. And there is no such thing as perfection in this world. There's no such thing as a perfect relationship with God, and there's no such thing as a perfect relationship with the other people. And that's really the takeaway, the beauty of the second tablets, because that's what actually lasts. So that's the sort of the big picture that we want to discuss. There's much more to say about the second tablets, and much more to say what happens between the first tablets and the second tablets. But that's point number one. If anybody wants to make a comment, now's a good time. Otherwise, we continue.
So, Rabbi, is that why the broken tablets are kept in the Beit HaMikdash?
Yes, that's one of the beautiful concepts here. I was gonna talk about that in a minute in another dimension, but let's just tie this in. So there's a beautiful teaching, and the teaching is that Moses shattered the first tablets. What happened with the first What happens with those first tablets? Did they just leave it there? So it shattered into pieces. So they just left it there. So the Talmud says that no, those shattered tablets were collected, placed in the ark together with the second tablets that were complete, which is very, very strange. How do we know this? We derive it from a verse. Ironically, the verse says there is nothing in the ark except for the second tablets. Ein ba'aron rak, nothing in the ark only. Now, like in English, the rabbis say two negatives make a positive. So if there's nothing, if you say two expressions of nothing, you mean there's something. There's something else in the ark except for the tablets. What else is in the ark except for the tablets? The shattered tablets, the broken tablets of the first tablets. Now, why would you put the first tablets in the ark, in the Holy of Holies? The Holy of Holies is a place of purity. We talk about the high priest. The high priest wore beautiful garments all year, as we read last week, and he had gold in his garments, except on Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, when the high priest entered the Holy of Holies, the chamber of the temple that housed the ark, there he would not wear any gold garments. He just wore white garments, no gold. Why? Because gold reminds God of the golden calf. So no gold in the Holy of Holies. Okay. If there's no gold in the Holy of Holies, why would you bring the shattered tablets, which remind us of the great sin? And why put that in the ark? And why place that in the Holy of Holies? It's like you're going on your anniversary date, and then what you do is you bring something that reminds your spouse of this terrible fight that you had. I mean, what's the point? So there's many ways of interpreting this, of why the shattered tablets were also in the ark. But one interpretation is what Neil is alluding to, is exactly our point. What we want to remind ourselves is that in some sense, the shattered relationship is what allows for the deeper relationship to endure. The fact that there was pain, the fact that there was difficulty, was not a sort of a bump in the road that we wish never happened. To the contrary, because there was this difficulty, therefore we were forced to work at it and invest in the relationship, and we end up with a relationship that is less pure, less perfect, but much deeper and much more enduring and much more rewarding. And that's really the message of the second tablets and the advantage over the second tablets over the first tablets. It's not as pure, it's not a kala, it's not like a bride, but it is something that could endure anything, any type of relationship, because you have the human intervention. Person falls in love. Okay, I fall in love. You fall in love, it's a gift from God. It was given to you. You don't have to work at it. You don't have to invest in that relationship. And therefore, you can be sure it's not going to last. It may last a week. It may last 10 years. It may last 100 years. Doesn't matter how long it lasts. But ultimately, if it was been given, in other words, if you didn't have to invest to create it, it's not going to last. And that's the shattering of the first tablets. And then you get to the opportunity to make the second tablets. Make second tablets is, can I bring the stones? Can I invest something? Can I work to create this to deepen this bond? And the answer, of course, is yes. And when you do, the relationship is deepened. And that's the story of the second tablets in short. Okay, there's so much more to say, but I want to speak the last 5 minutes, talk about a little bit of the mysticism in this parsha, because there are a lot of verses in this parsha that are very cryptic. Basically, what happens is, let's just share the screen for a moment. After Moses gets the 10 tablets, God speaks to Moses, and God tells him the 13 attributes of mercy. The 13 attributes of mercy can be found in verse 6 and 7. Basically, what happens is Moshe wants to understand the code of forgiveness. What do we do? How do we replicate the story of forgiveness? Moshe was amazed that God forgave the people. So he says, tell me the code. Let's say I get into a fight with somebody. My spouse, no, that never happens. My children, anybody. So what do? So I try to do many things to appease them. So I go and buy them chocolate. I buy them flowers. Whatever I do 10 things. The problem is I don't know which one worked. So what worked? What do I do? How do I replicate the scenario? If I get the forgiveness, what do I do now? Like, what's the formula? So God gives Moses the formula. He says, you want to understand how to replicate the forgiveness? There's the formula. It's called the 13 attributes of mercy. You evoke these attributes of mercy, and I will forgive the people. And that's what we do. We do this every weekday. And on Yom Kippur, we say this multiple times, especially on the Elah, the final prayer of Yom Kippur. We keep repeating it. Hashem, Hashem, Ke'orachum v'chanun. That's a secret formula of forgiveness. And that's very mystical. What do these 13 attributes mean? What does it represent? What is the meaning of it? How does it achieve forgiveness? That's all wonderful questions. That's for next year. But before that, even before the second tablets, Moshe tells God, I want to understand. You forgave the people. I want to understand your glory. He wants to understand something. God says, okay, we're going to try to do this. You can't see my glory because you can't see my face, because nobody can see God's face and live, but you'll see my back, but you won't see my face. Okay, wonderful. So we have the story. Let's read verse 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, and then we're going to give it's very cryptic and very mystical, but there are multiple interpretations. We'll give one or two interpretations. We'll see how it goes. So, and he said, God says, show me your glory. Moses says to God, show me your glory. Verse 19, he said, God says, I will let all my goodness pass before you. I will proclaim the name of the Lord before you. In other words, God says, I'm going to tell you my name. And that's really the 13 attributes of mercy, 13 ways of evoking God's name. And I will favor when I wish to favor, and I will have compassion when I wish to have compassion. Different interpretations of what this means. Most simple interpretation is, when you say my name, when you say these 13 attributes, I will then have compassion, and the people will find favor. Okay, verse 20. And he said, you will not be able to see my face, for man shall not see me and live. And the Lord said, behold, there is a place with me, and you shall stand on the rock. And it shall be that when my glory passes by, I will place you into the cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand, and you will see my back, but my face shall not be seen. Okay, this is obviously very mystical and very cryptic. What does it mean God has a place? What does it mean that God places Moses in the rock? God will pass. You could see God's back and you can't see God's face. So there are all kinds of interpretations of what this means. I'm going to give two interpretations, one very, very briefly and one a little bit more elaborate. So the more brief interpretation, I just don't want to get too Kabbalistic here, but you probably heard of the Kabbalistic doctrine of the Tzimtzum. In other words, what does the Tzimtzum mean? Contraction. In other words, the Kabbalah talks about this idea that there's sort of a paradox. If God is infinite, how does God express himself and create a finite world? How could you have infinite energy creating something that's finite? This is a big Kabbalistic problem. Now, the simple answer before the Arizal was, well, the light is diminished. You have infinite light, you keep diminishing the light, and you keep diminishing until the light is absent, and therefore you can create you can create something that's limited, that does not see the divine light. So that was the early schools of the Kabbalah. But the later schools of the Kabbalah, like the Arizal said it doesn't work because you can't diminish infinity. In other words, diminishing infinity, if you less and less and less infinity, no matter how much you diminish, there will still be overwhelming light. So what the Arizal proposes, and this becomes a standard Kabbalistic model, is that you have the idea of tzimtzum. Tzimtzum is that you have the infinity of God's presence is everywhere, the infinite light is everywhere. But then in order to create, God has to sort of contract himself, create an empty space. And within that empty space, that's where the world could exist. Because the world cannot exist where the presence of God is felt. Because the world means something that feels its own existence. So if I feel God's presence and God's the true reality, then I wouldn't feel myself. So the Kabbalistic doctrine is God has to create an empty space, what they call a halal, an empty cavity, an empty space, in which he then brings in a limited amount of light, and all the universe can be created in that space, which is absent of the infinite light, but only has a little ray of light. Then it leads to other questions. What does it mean that God is not here? So the Hasidic interpretation is God's essence is here, not the light, without getting into all of this. Say some of the Kabbalists that this is really what God is saying. When God says in verse 20, not in verse 20, what did I just say? Verse 20. Yeah, verse 21. Behold, there is a space with me, and you shall stand in the rock. And it shall be when my glory passes by, I will place you into the cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I have passed by. They say as follows: God's glory is God's infinite light. You cannot see God's infinite light. You have to understand that anything we could understand within God is only when we are placed in that cleft of the rock, when we're placed in that empty cavity, in the place that's empty of the infinite light, and only there, God's back, which is a little bit a ray of God, is brought down into that space, and that's where we could see God. In other words, what he's really saying is all the 13 attributes that we're going to read about is names of God, it's expressions of God, but it's not the infinite light of God. Okay, a lot more to say about this because this touches upon the fundamental Kabbalistic concepts. But I want to say something else, another Hasidic idea, which is a little bit easier to picture. And the Kabbalists explain there's a metaphorical rock, tsur. What does tsur mean? Tsur could either mean the source of where you take rocks from. In other words, where you, what do they call it? Quarry, where you hew the stones from. But tsur also has a specific meaning. Tsur could mean like a flintstone, a stone that can produce fire. And the Hasidic interpretation is as follows. What is God really telling Moses? So you look at the fire. Fire is a relationship. Fire represents love and passion. And when the betrayal happens, the person does not feel any more, doesn't have within their heart any fire to God, any passionate connection to God, any feeling for God, because that evaporated. Because when I betray, I don't do what I'm supposed to do, that fire escapes. Just like fire needs a wick and it needs fuel to be able to remain in this earth. Otherwise, it just evaporates. So too, if you want God, the feeling of God's presence and the love and passion to God, you have to make the vessel. You have to do things that allow for God to rest in your life. But if I betray God, if I create a golden calf, there's no more fire. The fire is gone. It's like taking the coal, a fire, the flame, and throwing it into the water. It's gone. It's gone. What are you going to do? So what Moses really wants to understand, he says, how do we recreate the fire if the fire has been extinguished? And the Kabbalists say that that's why God mentions the image, evokes the image of the tsur, of the rock, but specifically the rock that produces fire, like the flintstone. He says, you're going to go into the rock. And the rock is a fascinating thing because unlike the flame needs certain conditions for the flame to be able to last. But the rock, you can put it at the bottom of the sea for 1,000 years, pull it out, take the iron and bang the rock, and the sparks will emerge. Why? Because the rock is the metaphor for the essence. And in the essence, you don't always see the flame because the essence is concealed. But the potential to create the flame always exists. And that's what God is telling Moses. He says, every soul, you look at any person, if you don't see the fire, it's not because the fire cannot be there. It's because the fire is not there in the state of actuality. It's not like the fire on the coal. But whenever you look at a person, you have to look at a person as if the fire in the stone, in the flintstone, of course, not literally, the fire is not in the flintstone, but you see what I'm saying? You see a human soul is the potential to always recreate the fire, and that potential to recreate the fire is always there. No matter what happens, that fire is that potential for fire is always going to remain. You have to figure out how to bang it, how to produce that urgency, the force, the desire to want to create the God, to connect to God, and that creates the spark. So in short, God says, if you want to understand how forgiveness comes, if you want to understand how rehabilitation works, you have to look at yourself and understand, look at a person, look at yourself and understand that a person is much more than what the person feels at that moment. Don't just look for the flame, but look for the stone that can always recreate the spark. And that's the human story. The human story is, and in our relationship with God and with other people, that when the fire is gone, the spark, the starter, the spark the stone that can always reignite the spark, that is always there. And that is why we have to realize that's the source of all forgiveness and of rehabilitation and reestablishing the communication and the love with God. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a story in short. There's a lot more to say, but for that, you have to come back next year in good health. In the meantime, if you have any questions or comments or jokes, please share. Otherwise, we'll see you shortly in good health, hopefully, God willing.